My name's Paul Miller, and I'm founder and CEO of a startup called the School of Everything. And I also help run a little organisation called Social Innovation Camp that brings together geeks and people who've got ideas for projects and tries to get them together over the space of a weekend and build something new that's useful and that people will enjoy using. The School of Everything is a bit like a kind of eBay, but for learning stuff locally. So if you want to find somebody who could teach you tuba or cello or Swedish, then you come to School of Everything and we show you all the people in your local neighborhood, your city, who could teach you that. And if you've got something to teach, then you sign up for School of Everything and we link you to potential students. So it is this sort of kind of amateur education system. Well, the 20th century was, to my mind, a bit of an aberration. That was the unusual time. And the real reason was that we created bureaucracies that took in the vast majority of the working population. So, after Henry Ford and Taylorism, as it's called, and this idea that you can divide tasks up into boxes and that you can train people to just do that task, and you have this rapid kind of specialization and bureaucratization. And the truth was that wasn't creative. That was people as machines. That was trying to follow what was an incredible innovation in the Industrial Revolution, creating machines that did specific tasks. We then tried to create people that did specific tasks. And that just limited people. That just, they could be good at their jobs, but they couldn't change their jobs. And so I think that forced people to try and find identity elsewhere and to try and find outlets for their creative sides elsewhere. And now we've got to the point where the tools for them to do that are widely available. And so people can be much more creative outside of these bureaucracies, outside of this, the vestiges of 20th century working organizations still exist. I'm not denying that. But people are going around the outside of that system that was essentially meant to be productive. But it may well have been productive, but it certainly wasn't creative or innovative. And so actually we're starting to see an overall shift in the where economic and social value comes from, away from work and towards people's pursuits outside work. Or it could be that it is work, but it's certainly organized very unbureaucratically. And that kind of vibrancy of self-organized innovation as opposed to top-down organizations trying to achieve a particular task in a very military or very bureaucratic way, that shift is going on very rapidly now. It didn't happen in the 20th century. The 20th century was about building bureaucracies. I think the 21st century is about working around them and to some extent undermining them. I think that the way that you learn to be good at something is changing. So it used to be that the way you learned to be good at something was that you undertook a professional education, which is that professional educators who weren't the same as the professionals in a particular field would teach you how to be good at that thing. Now, what's happening is that actually the professional educators can be very remote from what is changing and what is happening in the profession. And you're starting to have to really work with the professionals or the people who are good at that particular field, sort of day by day, certainly month by month, year by year, in order to keep up with the way that things are changing in that field and to be part of the community that is developing. And so having a separate education in order to do something, so whether that's a 3, 4, 5 year degree in something, by the time you've done that, the world has changed. And so you need a much more networked education, a much more connected to the community of people who are really practicing in a particular field. You need that way of learning. You need to be so close to that in order to learn properly that it means that unless they're careful, formal education, formal universities or professional training organizations are really going to struggle because they can't keep up. And it's a really interesting time to be in formal education, I think. I don't think that formal education is going to disappear, but certainly when in relation to practical training and the skills that you need in order to be able to do something as opposed to just think about something, are changing very, very rapidly. And the problem is that formal education is becoming more expensive. And so, the incentives for somebody to take on a really expensive formal education in a particular field, I think, are going down at the same time as the universities are trying to make them more expensive. So at some point, there's going to be a break. At some point, people are going to start organising their own education and not think that a university is the best place to go in order to be the best that they can be in that particular field. And when that happens, I think, we're going to see quite a hollowing out, actually, of formal education, which could be painful for these institutions that were usually designed hundreds of years ago. Well, I think what's happened is that the barriers to entry to doing something to a very, very high standard have come down rapidly over the last 10 years particularly, and it's getting even cheaper every year. To be able to access the equipment and to be able to access the kind of information and knowledge that you need to get to a professional standard in a creative pursuit. And that's just had such a phenomenal impact on what people can sort of do and how they can learn themselves to become better, rather than necessarily having to go through a full professional training in order to get to the standard that is going to help them do something that they're proud of. And that's an amazing transformation, for both from a personal identity point of view. I can do something that is as good as the professionals. That's just a phenomenal sort of thing that can change the way that people think about what they are. They may well, have a profession that's separate, but actually their amateur pursuit is just as much a part of their identity, because they can be as good as some of the professionals that they see in that field. So whether that's filmmaking or animation or music, they can compete in some ways with the professionals without having gone through a massive, long professional training. I think what's going on is that there's a real mixing of people who are you would describe as being amateur because they maybe don't make their living from it, and the professionals. Now, what's going on is that the smart professionals don't find the amateurs a threat, and they're perfectly willing to help them. So one example of where this happens is in not so much a creative field, but is in a scientific field, is astronomy, where actually the professional astronomers who've gone through, years and years of training, academic, they've gone up the hierarchy, they become professionals. They work on the theory and on the really, really sort of cutting edge science, if you like, but they're completely reliant on amateurs to gather all the data that then informs the cutting edge theory. And so we've got to the stage where actually most discoveries of new astronomical objects are made by amateurs, not by professionals, because the amateurs, there's just so many more of them, and they have access to the technology and to the network of professional or professional amateur, because it's so blurred, astronomy. And so they can make discoveries just as often as the professionals, but that doesn't take away from the professionals, because they're still doing something that is incredibly valuable and incredibly interesting to the amateurs. So what you get is this ecosystem of people who are professionals, people who are amateurs, and people who are sort of in between, people who are professional amateur or amateur professional, whichever way you want to look at it. And that ecosystem, I think, is developing in other areas as well, particularly in the creative kind of fields. I think when you start with passion, which is what amateurs really do. You know, the origin of the word is doing something that you love. You know, your amateur pursuit is doing something that you love. And when you've got more and more people doing something because they love it, not because they're paid to do it, not because it sort of gives them some professional status or anything like that, they're doing it because they love it. And when you've got tens of thousands of people doing that and coming together to try and learn from each other and try and be better at whatever it is they do, I think you're going to end up with a better quality overall of whatever it is that you're doing. Now, that's not to say that they are going to be better than the professionals, but the total creative output, I think, is so much better, so much greater, so much more vibrant in the fields where amateurs have really been given sort of the tools and free rein to experiment. The total creative output, because of the blurring of amateur and professional and the rise of technologies that have enabled that to do, I think is so huge, and that's what we're really seeing. That's not to say that there isn't a lot of dross and a lot of crap that is created because you give anybody the tools to try things that used to be the domain of professionals. But it's the good stuff that floats to the top. One technological example that has become actually very mainstream now is the Drupal kind of content management system that was devised by a Dutch student, just as a way of like helping his friends run websites, basically. And turned out to be quite good. It was useful, but he open sourced it for very, very early on. And basically this community of people who weren't necessarily professional designers of content management software grew up around it because they were finding it useful. And the other genius part of what Dries did was he made it modular. So you didn't have to try and edit the whole thing. You could build your bit and it would plug into the Drupal system. And so what you got was this sort of fractal structure where there was the whole project, which was open source and lots of people were contributing to, and then there were individual parts of the project which were also open source and people were contributing to. And over the years, it got better and better and better and better until you started seeing kind of, the people who used to be professional web software designers starting to think, maybe we'll use that. Let's try that. And so then you started getting the professionals actually contributing to the source code of this thing that was actually designed to some extent by amateurs.